What we're going to talk about today is some of the changes in the generic and API industry and how to counter them. First, we've got the agenda here. Cover the API and Generics Intelligence Unit at Thomson Reuters. We'll talk about how we can expand the geographic reach and look at emerging markets, how to pursue economies of scale, and then lastly, we'll look at portfolio expansion and a brief glimpse into the rapidly evolving biosimilar market. And lastly, how to counter all that by effective product targeting. So, Thomson Reuters, as many of you may know, they provide information from the R&D all the way through the entire product life cycle. Newport focuses more on the generics and API industries. The Generics and API Intelligence Unit is formerly known as Newport Strategies. No other organization can match such an extensive worldwide set of resources as the foundation for building innovative new solutions for solving pressing problems. So let's start with an overview of the global generic industry landscape. Okay. We'll take a look at what's driving generics currently. Here are some of the main reasons for these dynamics. As we all know, there's quite a bit of encouragement from brand to generic substitution that seems to be going across a number of governments and healthcare schemes. There's continued to be price pressure, especially in the EU. There's not much of a pipeline for innovator companies, so there's not many products that are expiring for too many companies to go after. We're going to take a look today at the rapid pace of M&A over the past few years, patent challenges as a key to health of generic pipelines. We'll look at Indian finished dose production and high-quality API that's coming from China, and how licensing deals is key to sustaining growth and again, the emerging potential for biogenerics. But the one thing that remains of constant importance to generic companies globally, as well as the vitality of generic markets overall, is that these companies have access to the active ingredient, a viable quality supply of the active ingredient to ensure that they get the products to market. Okay, so first we'll take a look at expanding geographic reach and also economies of scale. Okay. Only about 40% of companies have survived acquisition, in the past 10 years or so. You can see some former big names here that often get lost in the midst of time. Ivax, APP, and Bayer in the U.S., Hexel, Merck, Generics and Beta Pharma in Germany, Pliva and Croatian, Zentiva, and of course most recently Actavis with the proposed acquisition. And all companies, these are all companies who have very significant market shares in their respective countries and regions, and that's primarily a driver for that. So far this year, that trend is looking to continue. Well over 100 deals totaling more than $11 billion already concluded this year. The most significant deals saw Amgen take a stride into the growing Turkish generic market through their acquisition of Mustafa. Lilly's purchase of Novast in China, and Watson's planned purchase of the leading Icelandic generic company Actavis. All of which are deals were made, in part at least, to expand geographic reach into other markets. And more recently, even, Sanofi just announced to purchase Genfar, which is the leading pharma company in Colombia, to become a market leader there as well. So clearly the trend to enter new markets through acquisition is certainly one strategy. Showing the interest to gain market share as well as economies of scale through emerging market acquisitions, there have been a total of just over 200 deals representing a roughly $14 billion of foreign investment in independent businesses in Indian businesses, since 2005. Some of the major ones that you can see here, obviously, Daiichi with the acquisition of Ranbaxy, Abbott with Piramal, and Hospira with Orchid, and Fresenius and Dabur. And some of these deals are acquisition for economies of scale, some of them for unique capabilities. Okay, so similarly, when you look at China, there's major investment that's continuing in China, with over 400 deals since 2005, and that's a roughly $9 billion target. A lot of these deals was for both API as well as finished dose. And here are some of the examples of sourcing agreements with Chinese companies. As you can see, Chinese companies have supply agreements with both big pharma and generics. And most of these supply agreements tend to be focused on the active ingredient, as we can see here from the activity. Although some companies are also making finished dose for their partners, such as Huahai. Okay, so at Thomson Reuters, what we do is we assess the capabilities and the experience of all global manufacturers of the active ingredient. And it's according to a proprietary scheme that we've had for 20 plus years, based on objective regulatory and primary intelligence gathering. Companies are essentially, or at least API manufacturers, are essentially classified into one of four categories based on their experience of supplying API into regulated markets. Over time, our analysts have developed a unique rating scheme for these manufacturers, established being the highest rating. These are companies with years of experience supplying into regulated markets. And as you can see here, there's about 170 of them. Less established just means that they're companies with less of a track record supplying API into regulated markets, either in terms of history or number of products supplied, but they're still certainly present. They've got FDA inspections, they've got regulatory filings, and they've got high quality active ingredient. Potential future, these are companies, and you're going to see some more stats on this in the coming slides, but these are companies that are little or no known performance and experience rather with regulated markets, but they certainly are showing that aspirations to become involved in those regulated markets based on our research. And then lastly, the local companies are those with no record, capability, or interest rather in supplying API to regulated markets. And as you can see with this pie chart of more than 2,000 manufacturers globally, the number of the established and less established is really only roughly 20% or so of the total pie. So when you look at where the established and less established manufacturers are located, over a quarter of them are based in the US, with India and China contributing another quarter. Traditional API sourcing markets such as Italy and Spain, together combined have as many experienced sources as China alone. So clearly, a lot of experienced manufacturers in India and China, and that's really no secret. However, we can see that in the past half decade, and going by those ratings that Thomson Reuters assesses, Indian companies have grown strong in each of the top three categories, pretty much roughly doubling the number of firms at that established and less established levels. So this shows that they've obviously got a lot of presence in regulated markets, US, Europe, Japan, and so on. What's really striking, however, is when we look at the Chinese API manufacturers in that similar scheme. As you can see with this graph, the number of the established and less established groups, they've grown considerably, but the really dramatic increase is in what's the future market. These are the potential future companies that are looking to enter regulated markets, despite very limited or no known performance. And as you can see, it appears it's more than double. But having said that, it should be kept in mind that the majority of Chinese companies, they actually do not have aspirations to enter regulated markets. There are actually more than about 800 companies in China who we wrote as local, that are quite happy to really just serve their domestic market. It will be interesting to see what this picture here will look like in another 5 years as Chinese companies are striving to come into compliance with the revised GMP regulations that were implemented in China last year. And with that GMP regulations, no doubt many of the smaller, more local players may actually drop from the market. So there's been numerous reports regarding what's called a second wave of emerging markets. These countries are expected to contribute almost half of annual pharmaceutical market growth in 2013. And as costs are starting to rise in India and China, whether it be labor costs or energy costs, API is rising, the API costs in India and China, more companies are actually looking to these lower cost regions as potentially alternative suppliers. But really when we compare the number of API manufacturers in these countries with India and China, it's still significantly less. So again, when we actually look at these emerging market, it seems the most promising alternative option, at least for sourcing of the active ingredient for regulated market players, seems to be with South Korea. And that's certainly true with some large molecules, which we'll take a look at momentarily. Also Taiwan, Eastern Europe. These regions offer more API manufacturers with experience supplying regulated markets than some others. South Korea has been an API sourcing choice for Japanese companies for a number of years, and this has encouraged manufacturers in South Korea to develop more quality processes. And also the accession of Poland and other Eastern European countries into the European Union has prompted API manufacturers in the region to meet more stringent EMEA manufacturing standards, of course, while offering a lower cost base than the traditional European markets. And looking at Taiwan, over the past few years, the government of Taiwan has invested over $2.5 billion into the local pharmaceutical market, in addition to establishing a bit more of a stringent regulatory guidelines with the local FDA. And this increasing competition and industry consolidation in these markets will continue to push manufacturers to search for strategic advantages and lower costs. And while some of the emerging markets may have aspirations to become major market players in the global API manufacturing field, at this time, we do not anticipate the manufacturing really to move too far out of India and China. And emerging markets will continue to be of interest to many companies, especially those looking to diversify. But as far as sourcing destinations, the source of the active ingredient, it's unlikely that they'll be able to compete, at least on the scale of India and China. So moving a bit more away from the active ingredient and over to the portfolio management and finished dose. Generic companies have responded to some of these industry challenges by expanding their portfolios and getting involved with more niche products. Also, the emergence of biosimilars represents a very unique opportunity for many of the aggressive companies with the right capabilities. So that goes for finished dose, CMO, API as well. And those who are lacking these capabilities are often, they're starting to strike deals to gain an entry into the biosimilar market, just because it takes such unique capabilities. So while making investments into specialized manufacturing, many companies are also partnering with some others that have these niche capabilities. Although much of the partnerships and investments have been focused primarily in the West, there are many Indian companies getting involved as well. And currently, as a limited number of Chinese companies have expressed interest in niche areas, but of course we will see that change in the future. And as you can see here, a number of these, or all of these deals that were made here were primarily for access to capabilities. So the follow-on biologics, biosimilars, that market is gaining a lot of interest. Just a quick refresher for you, the three main biotech categories: recombinant proteins, monoclonal, polyclonal antibodies, and of course vaccines. You can see that there is a significant number of products in each category, but that the vast majority of revenue is tied up in a dozen or so blockbusters. Along with developing regulations for biosimilars, the amount of money that's tied up in these products has been a major motivator for deal making in this area. What is important to note is that a large majority of these sales, the revenue is tied up in about 20 or so blockbusters, those selling more than $1 billion worldwide, And this will help us to understand which products the competition is really looking at. So in other words, which are the more profitable ones to target for follow-on biologic development. Rather busy slide here, but it can help explain U.S. patent expiry, SPC, and then for recombinant as well as monoclonal antibodies. And looking at this loss of exclusivity, or more accurately here, product patent expiry for the U.S. and the earliest SPC expiry in Europe for proteins and mAbs. We can see that the pace will really pick up in the next few years, and that there's a pretty good opportunity actually in these countries for generic companies to bring biosimilars to market. Most of the earlier expiries, looks like prior to 2001, are in the class of those recombinant protein-based products, with mAbs making more of the future type opportunities. So it looks like about now and beyond. Just a timeline here. This is actually taken from our regulatory database at Thomson Reuters called IDRAC. In the context of what I just showed in terms of potential patent and exclusivity expiries for biologic drugs, I thought it would also be useful to show this timeline. This is based on the legislation and the regulation around the world. We know the European community was certainly the first region to define this pathway, and because of that, we'll see in a moment that Europe is also where these first biosimilars have been launched. Elsewhere, there's been a gap and number of years before Australia defined their rules, and then of course you can see a rapid increase in the number of countries putting these approval routes into law. And the U.S. they've somewhat finalized their biosimilar regulations now, and of course more recently you can see India has too. So now let's get back to launches and potential opportunities. While the U.S. has been the last major market, at least, to define a pathway for biosimilars, Europe has been more advanced. And you can certainly see here the effect of that environment on the deal-making activity, most of which were focused on those earlier opportunities for recombinant products, recombinant proteins. And here you can see the majority of launches of these first-wave products around the world in markets as diverse as China, Thailand, and even Ukraine. Despite the number of biologics losing exclusivity in Europe and other countries, there are still not too many true biosimilars that have been launched. And this certainly reflects the very large investments that must be made before companies are in a position to compete in this field, especially at least in highly regulated markets. Now let's take a look at the companies. And we know that because of the amount of investment into biosimilars, the larger companies will be here. But this is just a snapshot of, because there's another form of this specialized manufacturing, you can see that these top generic companies have relatively well-developed capabilities. This could be through in-house, this could have been through acquisition. Many of the launches of biosimilars in the recombinant products, there are many launches, I should say, of biosimilars in the recombinant products, but there's also a lot of development underway, and that's where you can see full production is FP and UD is under development. A lot of companies getting into antibodies as well. And you can see here that Teva, Hospira, Stada, Ranbaxy, Apotex, a few others are all in a pretty strong position to compete. So the application of the new exclusivity rules in the U.S. has a profound impact on the potential exposure of biologic drugs to competition from biosimilars over the next decade. What we see here is matching with sales, both U.S. as well as worldwide, for pretty much the top 10 as far as biosimilars, and a lot of these are monoclonal antibodies. And even in the U.S., as we all know, as they define an NDA-like pathway for biosimilars in the U.S., all but the strongest and most capable companies will be able to compete. This is a bit different for generic companies. They have to do clinical testing. It's not something they're used to with ANDAs. Substantial dossiers, post-market safety surveillance. They've got to have their own marketing team to doctors. And there you go, lack of substitutability. will likely require some sort of sales force. And finally, with at least one innovator in the race and several others, rumored, there will be some serious competition, not just from generic companies getting into biosimilars, but branded companies who are looking to get a piece of that pie too. So how do we figure out how to go after these opportunities? Well, first you need to have the information to take a closer look at them and see if it's something that a company can go after. This is just a simple snapshot of Rituximab taken from the Newport's biologics module. It shows you essentially the steps that need to be taken to get to the finished product, Rituximab. And keys to succeeding in this are obviously understanding the regulatory requirements. That's the same for large or small molecule, but certainly more profound with large molecule. And then a more sophisticated approach to product selection. Perhaps looking at opportunities based on patent protection and the other items you see here, like sales figures and competition, opportunities in multiple markets, but the ability to combine that all into one search opportunity, or rather to find the more robust opportunities. Now, all of the information that we had taken here was from Newport Premium and from the Newport's API intelligence research team. And Newport Premium is a system that was launched many years ago. It's expressly designed to meet these key generic demands, especially when you're targeting products based on patents and so on, and identifying licensing opportunities, and more notably, finding the early opportunities. And the way this is done is by looking at the unique API intelligence and seeing who's really manufacturing the active ingredient, combining that with sales and consumption, the patents and expiries, the synthetic routes, and where it's been launched worldwide. That's certainly one way of seeing which products and by whom will be coming to regulated markets, is to see if they've launched in other markets. This is a very simple case study that I've created here. If you were to look at patent expiry after 2013, and we could do this by a number of countries, this example here shows you it's 981 products. If I then combine to that search, looking at those opportunities where sales are greater than 500 million worldwide, we're at roughly over 200 products. And again, this is how we're going to try and find the niche ones. Try and perhaps looking at those that are launched in the USA, we're about 127 products. Getting more niche, you can see that when I combine that with parenteral, we're down to 65. Making sure that I can find a valid source of API, meaning it's from most regulated markets, which is an analytic we use in Newport to give you an idea of how much active ingredient is out there. You can further define that there's going to be a quality supply. And then lastly, again, by combining parenteral oncology, obviously that's large and small molecule, but the reality is a lot of the large molecule is looking into those as a niche, and we narrow it down to 23. From those 23, perhaps we get one example, Rituximab. This is just a screenshot showing you how you can access the sales, the consumption. You can look at the patents, the exclusivities, the API availability. This screenshot right here is just looking at the sales, consumption, and the fact that there's enough API out there. Other screenshots within the system would show me the active ingredient, all the patents, and a very important analytic called the Newport constraint date, which is the date in which Newport predicts generics can enter the market. So take a look at, in this case, this is the active ingredient for Rituximab. And in this screenshot, it tells you who has it commercially available versus who has it under development, and that's really what this legend down at the bottom helps explain. The green circle is commercially available, number of companies having this under development, a number of companies are unconfirmed, which means we're still in the process of confirming their involvement, and lastly, the little blue square, that means that they're just getting involved. And there's also this rating here. Oh, I'm sorry, there's the manufacturing status. And here's the rating, where you can actually see which companies are capable of supplying into regulated markets. That gets back to that pie chart we looked at the beginning, showing who is established versus less established, and also by specific country. We've got a booth here. It's across and down the road a little, 4B37. Thank you for your time today. I hope that you found the session interesting.